So we should boost the telling of fairy tales in infant school, certainly. And we need to be honest with children, but tell them.
So that's literally the dumbest thing I've ever heard. I've never heard anything as dumb as that. In that we should stop teaching about climate change and we should teach fairy tales instead.
Joining me now are both Chris McGovern, who's campaigned for real education. A little bit later, we're going to be talking to Caroline Hickman, who's University of Bath Climate Psychology Alliance, and also a member of Extinction Rebellion. But Chris, let's start with you. Chris McGovern, Campaign for Real Education. What do you feel about this?
What do I feel? Well, I think, adults have a lot of anxieties about climate change, but we shouldn't be burdening our children with those anxieties. Our campaign often complains about low standards in our schools, but there's one league table in which we're at the very top, and that, according to the Children's Society, is on unhappiness. We're the worst in Europe for that. So burdening children with all these adult anxieties is, I think, a problem.
And adults shouldn't be anxious about climate change. People like him will be fucking long gone by the time we see the massive impacts of climate change. If anybody, the people who really do need to know about the futures that they need to have the political will to change is going to be young people. It's almost like that this guy has a political interest in ensuring that the people who are going to be affected by climate change do not take political action to deal with the issues of climate change. Although luckily this guy apparently isn't a climate denier. I think he's just a person who, one of those kind of people where the discourse has shifted now, where it's not, does climate change exist or not? It's A, is it something that there is a man-made climate change, right? And B, is it so far gone that we can't do anything about it, so we shouldn't bother trying to do anything about it? Those are the two positions you really see nowadays. You very rarely see actual climate deniers nowadays.
For children, we want them to have a childhood, and yes, of course they need to be green in a sense. They need to be environmentally sound. If they're going to learn anything, I suppose I would suggest they learn about Thomas Malthus, who back in the 18th century said we're all going to be dead shortly because the population's increased and the food production can't keep up. And he was wrong. Or we could go back to the 13th century. See, I'm a historian. In the 13th century, people were going around Europe whipping themselves because they thought the world was going to end because of the Black Death. Often things work.
Yeah, I'm sure these are exactly the same, right? It's exactly the same between people whipping themselves because they thought they caught the Black Death, and teaching children the real science around issues of climate change. That's a ridiculous comparison. Well, it's interesting that it brings up the Malthusianism type stuff, because that's what you hear from anti-degrowth leftists around issues with regards to the lack of prosperity which degrowth politics would give you. And I can see the arguments around that. I'm not a Malthusianist myself. I don't think that the kind of eco-fascist depopulation arguments hold any merit either. But to say that we need to have a greener economy necessarily translates to we need to have degrowth. That's not the same thing. What also the anti-climate action people will do, the think tank type people, is they'll try and link these ideas together. The idea that necessarily going green also therefore must at the same time lead to some kind of lack of economic prosperity. And that's actually not the case. In fact, one of the main issues we have with our economy at the moment is high energy prices. It's not just affecting people's residential household bills for their energy, it's also affecting energy that's being paid for in industrial production, in manufacturing, even in the retail delivery sector. Bills are going up for energy, which is having a knock-on effect on prices, on wages, on the ability of consumer spending. It has this huge effect on the entire economy, and that is down to how non-green our energy system is. If our energy system had more renewable energy, which is way cheaper than the overpriced gas, which is caused by the war in Ukraine, increasing wholesale gas prices in Europe, we would have a stronger economy, because the energy would be cheaper, businesses would be thriving. Like, what's the point? Why would a business open up in the UK when they are paying double the kilowatt hour price for energy than they would get if they set up shop in wherever fucking Sweden or Finland to do their manufacturing? That's the real issue that we have here. The idea that there is a correlation between this kind of degrowth argument and climate change, it's nonsense, completely nonsensical. Again, the green industrial revolution stuff, which is one of the good policies you're getting from Starmer's Labour Party, explicitly addresses this.
Work out better. So it's not all doom and gloom. And, children do deserve a childhood. So we overdo it, I think. And I also worry about teachers, because do teachers know enough about climate change? Are they going to be balanced? Are they going to have their own agenda? This is a problem.
Now, let's say
Yes,
teachers
the agenda of teaching basic facts about climate science.
don't do anything about it at all. The difference between you and I when we went to school, maybe we got hold of our parents' newspaper, maybe if we were allowed, if you weren't sent to bed when the magic roundabout came on, maybe you could listen to the news, but that was it. Nowadays, if teachers say nothing about something, there is still the internet, there's still social media. So that anxiety and all of those doom and gloom, and probably I'm going to stick my neck out here and say, definitely most of it, or a lot of it, is way, 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 way less informed than any teacher could do at their very worst. So they're still going to be picking up this anxiety. So do teachers just pretend?
And in general, again, we'll go back to the policy exchange study about progressive issues, for example, like dealing with climate change. Again, the policy exchange study shows that it's not coming from teachers, it's coming from social media. Trisha is indeed right on this particular issue. But again, there's also a change in, and she's right, there's a change in the way education works now. When this fucker was, this cadaver was growing up, schools were very much still stuck in the Victorian model. Obviously, we're still pretty stuck in the Victorian model nowadays too, but the Victorian model for housing and the Industrial Revolution, how that basically made the model for education that we had for a long period of time in this country, was concerned with one thing and one thing only, and that was churning out people who had enough education to be able to operate the machines necessary for the industrial capacity of this country, and that's it. They weren't taught to be critical thinkers. They weren't taught to be, members of the community, to adhere to the social contract. They were taught the basic things that they needed to know to be able to be compliant and obedient workers. That's the real issue. And luckily, our education system is far more holistic nowadays. And does give people, and young people specifically, the tools, the critical thinking skills that they need. Not enough, I would argue. There needs to be more discussions of critical thinking in our schools. But clearly that's been a far more well-rounded education system that we have now, and much better than they had in their days.
And it's not going on, or actually tackle it with a more balanced, a more nuanced approach.
Well, they certainly need to give it a more nuanced approach. I mean, I'm a bit older than you, I suspect. So I can remember going to school in 1962, walking to school, and we were talking about the end of the world then, because there was going to be a nuclear strike from Russia. Because the Cuban...
This guy, whoa. So from the Campaign for Real Education, okay, right? It opposes the teaching of sociology and politics, and has been critical of anti-racism and anti-sexism. And said that a mock trial held by Welsh school children about Conservative MPs' ancestral links to the slave trade were brainwashing. Incredible. Sociology, as an entire subject, banned from being taught if these people get their way. They're these people. There's the same group of people who will look at the changing politics of young people in this country and assume that it must come from some kind of fifth column. It's exactly what I was saying in the Matt Goodwin stuff. Like these centrist types, or right-wing in this guy, but general, the kind of classical liberal types, will look at progressivism rising amongst young people, and in their mind, the way political ideology works is everyone is centrist, vast majority, and there's a bell curve where the extreme politics is very small, loud minorities. When they will look at something like a large number of young people being on the left of politics, and instead of analysing the material conditions that has led to this political radicalisation, this reaction to neoliberalism amongst young people, and they will assume that it cannot be a nature of people's material conditions because they don't believe in historical materialism or materialist analysis in general, because we're fucking liberal types, hence the term classical liberal, the rejection of materialist philosophy. They say, well, no, it can't be a reaction to material conditions, and they fit outside of this neat bell curve that I have of how societal ideology must function, so there must be some kind of fifth column that's indoctrinating these people. It cannot be a natural position these people have come to, when, as we've seen, the stats just show them that it's not true. That people see this stuff on social media. It is a nascent political movement born out of people's material conditions.
Lifestyle crisis. We got through all of that. The teachers didn't actually discuss it. I think teachers do have to be open with children, but not overburden them. It's not all bad in the world. And, you know, sometimes...
I mean, can you ever not consider that maybe people have really poor mental health amongst young people? Not because we're teaching too much about climate change, but A, because governments aren't doing enough to tackle it, because they are cucked to the fossil fuel industry, and B, because the country is fucked. Neoliberalism is garbage, and young people's futures have been destroyed by 45 years of horrendous economic policy, and the death of the social contract, and the fact that fascists are fucking back, right? It's not just climate change and iPhones.
Adults are too keen to foist these anxieties onto children. Of course, children need to be given some sort of guidance, and of course, teachers can't totally ignore it. But what teachers shouldn't be doing is presenting a one-side horror story. You know, we've got enough problems in the world without...
Yeah, unfortunately, mate, the one-side horror story is the truth, right? What you're saying is that teachers should lie about the fate of the world if we do not take the action that we're currently doing. With the current trajectory, we are on course for the apocalypse, quite frankly. Maybe not, you know, in the next 40 years, for example. You know, there'll still be plenty of time for the living that we currently deal with. But if things continue as they are, the kids that are living today will see that fate in their lifetimes, right? So what if they're 15, 16, studying at school today? The given current lifespans going up into the 90s sometimes. You know, that's plenty of time for the issue of climate change to not be resolved and to get so much worse that we are led to the kind of apocalyptic predictions that we're seeing from climate scientists right now, right? So you're asking people to lie, to pull wool over people's eyes, to tell a noble lie, one might say, in the words of Edmund Burke.
Emphasising this, and as I say, it's a great sadness to me that so many children these days in Britain seem to have mental health problems. But the country in Europe with the fewest mental health problems and the happiest children, oddly enough, in Europe is Romania. A lot of poverty there. Maybe this affluent society breeds neurosis.
Yeah, you've got
to... No, but it's not that. We're not an affluent society. We're the most unequal country in Europe. Because what people will tell you is that societal dysfunction comes not from overall poverty. It comes from relative poverty. It comes from having an unequal society, right? Romania is slightly more equal than ours, which means that they do have better mental health outcomes there than we do over here, because we fundamentally, we are a country full of poor people and some rich people, right? This affluence that he thinks that everybody has is confined to boomer generations and Gen X's, essentially. Millennials and Gen Z, we've not seen any of that, right? We've not seen any of this affluence that he claims is everywhere. Young people have become incredibly radicalized in this country, and it's not because the teachers are teaching them it.
Good point there. I think, we give our kids a lot more, or British parents tend to give their children a lot more in material goods, or want to, or judge how good a parent they are by how much, you know. I have to agree with you. I often get very, very cross with people who have that point of view, because I had my childhood in Africa, and yet they're very, very happy, and they don't give their kids iPads and phones and things like that. They have to give them attention, and they're involved in society. I'm still waiting for Caroline to get online, but let's come back.
Literally, exactly what I said. They can't properly analyse the failures of neoliberalism because, again, they're both highly bought into this fucking dumb political ideology. So they have to make up other reasons. Oh, it's teaching about climate change. Oh, it's the phones. Too much iPhone, iPad. I've never looked at a scientific study in my life.
To that point, dealing with children's anxieties, there are two ways to do it, as you say: foist our anxieties onto them, or say, look, this is what you're going to hear, this is what you're going to see online, this is how you can deal with it. Here are some maybe tools to deal with it, what you can do on a certain level, what you can't do, and this is where you can go for more proper information, rather than teachers are now having to combat whatever's out there on the internet as well, aren't they?
Well, they are bombarded with information and doom and gloom stories. There's no doubt about that. But, you know...
The problem is that we're too busy not lying enough to people. We need to give them... Again, it is religious thinking, right? Is that they want convenient lies rather than inconvenient truths. And they actually... Basically what it really is they want to indoctrinate children into lies, into not being taught the real truth, because they're patronizing, right? They're patronizing children about this stuff.
I've taught for 35 years, and I've taught 5-year-olds, and I've taught 16, 18-year-olds. But when you're teaching young children in particular, fairy tales, and they're under scrutiny now and they're being banned. But fairy tales tell us about a nasty world. You have wolves eating grandmothers and stuff, horrible stories. But they allow children to enter a sort of fantasy world. They can see there is a dark side to humanity. So we should boost the telling of fairy tales in infant school, certainly. And we need to be honest with children, but
So that's literally the dumbest thing I've ever heard. I've never heard anything as dumb as that, in that we should stop teaching about climate change and we should teach fairy tales instead. I can't believe there's a serious person with a real position. I'm going mad. What the fuck am I hearing? More fairy tales, less truth. That's unironically this man's position.
Tell them about what's happened in the past and tell them how we've got through crises in the past and tell them basically human engineering.
I mean, the thing is, what's interesting as well is they say, well, how do we get through crises in the past? Well, I actually think that's correct. We should listen to the past and how we did things. Like, for example, how we managed to get through the Blitz, not with the Blitz spirit, but by taking preventative measures to ensure that people's lives were saved, right? Instead of, we didn't tough it out through the Blitz by just letting our children being bombed to build emotional character. We fucking evacuated them to the countryside. We evacuated children en masse. We thought, instead of just pretending that if we ignore the problem, it will go away, we took early and preventative action to save children's lives. I think that was good policy. It's really weird how these boomer types as well always view the kind of the World War period as some kind of, with these rose-tinted glasses, especially boomers who actually didn't live through it, these rose-tinted glasses about what actually went on during that period, rather than the silent generation who lived through that period properly, who actually genuinely understand the kind of collectivist decisions adhering to the social contract that were necessary to win the war as a country together, rather than this neoliberal wishy-washy way that he thinks that we got through these kind of situations. It's genuinely delusional.
Ingenuity gets us through most crises. Yes, it is a difficult one. They can do a little bit. If we told them the whole truth, we would say, you can forget it. Because if in the UK we go carbon neutral, it doesn't make any difference. We produce less than 1% of the world's pollution. So it's China, it's the United States, it's Brazil, it's India, the other countries. So if we're going to be really honest with us, we can all get doom and gloom, but we can't go on like that. These children need to have a future.
It's almost like, well, first of all, the reason why it's China and India and all these places is because we've exported our manufacturing there. So we have essentially, we have palmed off our carbon onto the developing world and China, obviously, which can't really be called the developing world anymore. I don't think you can call them the biggest economies in the world developing at this point. But we have moved our carbon offshore. We deal with it elsewhere because we don't manufacture in this country anymore because we're now a service economy and a financialized service economy at that. But second of all, well, why would any country then, if none of them have to bother giving up anything to deal with the climate crisis because we won't do it, why would any other country do it as well? Right? Why would any other country just say, well, actually, no, it's all China's fault? And then China goes, well, no other country wants to do it, it's apparently all our fault, so we won't do it either. The whole system breaks down unless you adhere to a global social contract too. I'm just saying, well, ours is only small, so why bother? If all 250 countries did that, then where would we be?
There needs to be given optimism. And yes, I say Thomas Malthus is your man. He told us we'll all be dead by now, and he was wrong.
Well, let's bring in Caroline Hickman here, University of Bath Climate Psychology Alliance and a member of Extinction Rebellion. We should add that as well.
Caroline... So yeah, and again, it's the same kind of false dichotomy, false balance shit you get on the BBC. I'm going to basically talk to you on the BBC, have the same hiring procedures for basically at this point, where you just go, well, on one hand, we have someone who is an academic who studied this stuff, who is a genuine expert on these issues. On the other side, you have this paid-up member of an ideological pressure group with no education in this area whatsoever come to say demented stuff, and then people watch you go, well, I guess the truth is somewhere in the middle then, I guess.
What are your thoughts on this?
Thank you. It's very interesting to join you. Thank you for addressing this question. It's fascinating. Yes, humanity has dealt with many crises in the past. Humanity's never dealt with a crisis on this scale before. We reassure ourselves by saying, well, when we get over this, when we get beyond this, everything will be all right. The problem is that isn't effective reassurance for something on the scale of the climate crisis, because there's no part of the planet that will not be touched by the climate crisis. So actually, when children and young people are speaking out and telling us how afraid they are, they're very healthy. Psychologically, this is incredibly healthy. For us to be giving them a different message to that than, yes, your response is healthy, is actually making the damage far worse for them, because this is
True. You gotta teach children the facts, right? Teach children realism, right? It's not doom and gloom. It's just what the reality, right? I understand that the boomer guy that we had on before doesn't want to acknowledge reality because it makes him sad. But kids they're made out of strong enough stuff to be able to look at the failures of politics to want to engender political change, and that's a good thing because it will take political will. Right? You can't just ingenuity your way out of it. So we'll just find the technology that fixes it eventually. Whether we'll just pump money into carbon capture. That's a real thing that will definitely work. Rather than use the existing solutions that we have right now that already work that just require the political will to implement.
Is older people really denying young people's emotional and cognitive experience of what's going on in the world. We measure mental health by looking at our capacity to respond to external reality. And external reality tells us that things are getting significantly worse. And so we have to actually respond in terms of reality rather than false reassurance, naive reassurance, because it's a systemic problem. It's a worldwide
Caroline, let me just ask you, looking at mental health.
Typical boomers enjoy the world while it burns. Then when they're in the ground, the next generation has to pick up the tab. House prices pay off the debt, deal with the climate crisis. Yep, basically, 100%. And again, I'm not going to blame the boomers for just being. I'm not saying that they're like a uniquely selfish generation or anything, but it was again, if you look at this from a materialist perspective, this was a result of political policy, right? A political policy of demutualization, of privatization, of neoliberalization, of globalization, of cheap consumer items but expensive necessities, and having the public sector sold off to give them a singular economic boom for one generation at the expense of future generations. They have had their material conditions set up in a way to make them that greedy and that selfish. They broke down the social contract in the 1980s under Margaret Thatcher, and the community and society has never recovered and probably will never recover from the long-term political material effect of how it's changed and shaped different generations ideologically. And you can't blame boomers for policies of the government at the time.
Health and looking at that it now is affecting children's mental health. Do we tell them, your mental health's being affected, but hey, that's healthy? But is there some balance about what you can do to do something? I know the University of East Anglia ran a course for 6 weeks, and I remember back when one of my daughters were at school, they did a picking up paper campaign, or they felt they were doing something, that they weren't hurtling towards doom without any brakes on.
Because again, that teaches them the wrong thing. That teaches them that you can fix the climate crisis by reducing your personal carbon footprint, when that literally does fuck all. Changing the straw you use does fuck all. Changing the plastic bags you use does a tiny amount, right? Not as fuck all as the plastic straws thing. The plastic bags being reused is actually good. We've massively reduced our usage, which is a good thing. But that's not going to finish it. That's not going to solve the crisis. That maybe will help not have a gigantic Pacific garbage island rather than an enormous Pacific garbage island that we have right now, for example. But that won't fix the issue of global governments being entirely cucked out to the petrochemical industry.
Isn't there a way of teaching children, yes, this is an issue, but yes, this is what you can do, and somehow, using that
because it's a lie. Because it's a lie. You can't do anything from an individualized level that is not just a fly in the ointment. I will continue to say that they should do this. You should try and recycle. You should reuse plastic bags. You should be as sustainable as you can in the way that you consume. I'm not one of these fucking no ethical consumption under capitalism, so I can do whatever I want type people. I think that you should always engender individual responsibility into people, because that helps put together the social contract as we take care of each other in our communities and our society on an individual level. But that will not stop climate change because it is a systemic problem. It is going to involve individual action and systemic change both together at the same time. And unfortunately, right, the systemic change has to come first. Because if we only do the individual change, it'll be a complete fucking fly on the ointment.
Rather than just saying, oh, you know, being anxious about the climate change, being depressed about it. Hey, that means you're healthy.
Well, actually, I would say to anybody who's feeling anxiety,
Fucking
you're only feeling
neoliberalism.
this.
Fucking neoliberalism indeed. Best time for a subscription notification to come out. Thank you very much for gifting us up to Belfast, Kevin. It is much appreciated, as always, for the support. And people, future YouTube viewers and also current viewers right now, you can become a member, just 99p to support the stream. You can super chat and have your message read out via text-to-speech, or you can drop bits messages in Twitch chat too, for also, which is $1 text-to-speech, as well as subscriptions available for £3.99.
It's because you care. And you should feel proud that you care. So I would reframe it in that sort of way and say, I would worry about the people who weren't anxious. As far as I'm concerned, that anxious response is a healthy response. Then you're absolutely right, Trisha. What you need to do is turn that anxiety into a form of positive action, but not dismiss the anxiety in the first place. So you're absolutely right. That positive action is really, really valuable, but don't dismiss the emotions behind it, or the way that children and young people are thinking about their futures, because that's disempowering and it's disenfranchising them. They're not old enough.
And it's also lying, and it's just lying. If you don't tell these people the truth about what will happen if we don't take action, that's lying. You're just lying to them. Is what you want. Is what this fucker up here wants to do.
Let me bring Chris in here. Chris, Caroline, has Caroline got a point there?
Look, Caroline's well-meaning and very sensible. What I would say to Caroline, if you start telling children the truth, we're all finished, because this country can do nothing about climate change. We can set an example. That's what we would say. But look, it's not Britain.
It was definitely harder for us to do things about climate change on a global scale now that we're not members of the European Union anymore, which is one of the biggest conglomerations of countries that has taken a collective action to mitigate the issues of climate change on a global scale, right? The European Union does a really good job of this, actually, and has increased how well it has done this over the years since UK left the European Union, which almost basically kind of saved the EU, ironically. You know, maybe this was a price worth paying. But again, the idea that we should just not do it because we're only 1% of it gives the excuse for every other country to do the same, and for collective action on a global scale to never happen, because every country will just be looking after their own. It's identical to the, well, why can't they just stay in another country for refugees? Just taking every single problem and just saying it's someone else's problem, creating a massive SEP field around the country.
It is China, it is the United States, it's Brazil, it's India. We can do very little. That's the truth. If you tell the truth to children, yes, we are all doomed. That's an awful message to send. So I suggest that with young children in particular, we don't face up to that. We don't tell them about that, because we will probably carry on. At the end of the day, we've had people forecasting disaster for many centuries, and for all sorts of reasons. We tend to have ingenuity.
Yeah, I'm sure the end is nigh billboards for people who believe in the Mayan calendar and the ending of the second Katun are exactly the same as the global conglomeration of climate scientists who are giving you accurate predictions based upon the current levels of heating and of proportional carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Those are definitely congruent political positions.
Question, and I need to interrupt you because I can't cope with listening to this. You're actually advocating that
you and me both, friend.
We should lie to children.
I'm advocating that if you tell children, when I was at school and we had a nuclear missile crisis.
You're advocating that we should lie to children. That's what you're saying.
Well, I'm afraid
I have to ask you about this.
Thought my words when I'm not saying you lie to children. You're the one who's saying you should lie.
You're saying don't tell them the truth.
Not what you're saying. The whole truth is that this country can do.
No, Chris, I'm really sorry. You've actually just said do not tell them the truth.
You won't tell the children the truth, but the truth is not what you're saying. There's a way out. There isn't a way.
So hang on. Let me come, Caroline. You're saying that you should tell children. Are you saying that you should tell children the unvarnished, untarnished truth?
The thing is, you've got children. children are not stupid. They're online. They're researching this for themselves. They don't need us to tell them a truth or a lie. They're finding out for themselves. They're really not stupid. To tell children, untruths around this, and actually we're arguing.
Well, that breaks the level of trust between people. It's like, well, you told me that everything was fine. We shouldn't have to worry about climate change. When actually I looked on the internet and found all of the studies and all of these articles showing the dangers of not dealing with climate change. Why did you lie to me? That breaks the level of trust between people and their institutions.
About truth and lies, when really it's about how we talk to children about this, not the detail of what we say. We've got to talk to them in ways that is tolerable, that is understandable, that is wise, and that is thoughtful. Absolutely. But we also have to support children with how they then feel about this and what they then think about it.
And even then, just like, you can tell them the truth, which is that, yes, would only be 1% of impact of global emissions, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't do it because of the knock-on effect of every single country doing the same thing. It has to be a collective global goal.
That is a respectful way to talk with children. The last thing we should do is pretend to children that what is going on is not what's going on. I'm going to quote a child on this because we should be listening to them. I'm going to quote a young woman who I asked, how do we talk to you about this without traumatizing you, terrifying you? And she said, tell us the truth, because if you're not telling us the truth, you're lying to us. And if you lie to us, we can't trust you. If we can't trust you, we can't talk to you about how we feel. And then we're in even double trouble. So we can't traumatize children further by leaving them to deal with the climate change problems and climate anxiety, and then lie to them on top of that. That's a moral injury. That is child abuse. This is the worst thing you could possibly do.
No notes. Pretty good.
So are you saying are you agreeing that with part of what Chris said, it's about age appropriate information, giving children at different ages the amount of information that they can cope with in a way they can cope with them? And you're saying that is different from lying to them?
This is extraordinary, though, Tricia, isn't it? Because it's as if we have to give them the information. They're online. They're educating themselves. They're really not stupid. So they're able to research.
Well, unfortunately, that's what boomers genuinely think about young people. They think that we're idiots. Obviously, I say we as if I'm anywhere near school age where I'm not. I'm 31. But even then, right, these people do just genuinely think that we're stupid.
This for themselves. So they go online, they read about it, and then they go and talk.
Also, just say, yeah, that's age appropriate. I mean, not every fucking 11-year-old is getting online to watch YouTube videos about climate change, for example. That's not happening. And I think that Tricia is reasonable in saying that we should be stratifying how we teach this, what we teach, and when we teach it based upon the age of the people who are learning it. But that's how we've always taught it. That's not a new thing. Right? Do you think we're going to 6-year-olds and saying the world's going to burn unless we divest from fossil fuels and deal with global car usage and changing to electric? No, of course we're not doing that to fucking 6-year-olds. Of course it's going to be taught to people in more complex, in more holistic ways as time goes on and as people age through the school system. We're not dumping the entirety of the climate science syllabus onto the youngest children as soon as they come into school. Obviously, it's going to be stratified by age. I don't know. So her point, whilst correct, is also moot.
To their parents, and their parents say, oh no, it's not that bad. What is that going to do to a child's mental health? They'll be left feeling confused, abandoned, betrayed. We need to of course we need to tell them the truth, but my research is with children as young as 5. And children as young as 5 have a perfectly good capacity to understand some of the realities of what's going on in the world around
Chris,
them. And they know when parents are lying.
So, Chris, you and I were talking about this earlier, that they're going to learn stuff or going to go online and see stuff, a lot of which probably isn't true anyway. So teachers might as well confront it head on with the truth.
Because we come back to this huge question, what is truth? I mean, we're talking to Meghan Markle, she has her truth, Harry has his truth, I have my truth, and Caroline has her.
Of course, they have to bring it back down for the royals. It was going to be that or trans people, right? It was going to be something about it's Talk TV, of course. It was going to be something about the royal family. It was going to be something about trans people. It was going to be one of the two.
Truth. Whose truth are we going to teach?
Not when it comes to the climate crisis.
In England and the UK, we have
95% of scientists agree.
We are much more climate aware than anywhere else. Our children are more aware of climate change than anywhere else, and they're also the most unhappy. That's what we do know.
But are the two inextricable?
Can you not think that maybe it might be something else about the UK that's made these people anxious, not just being taught about the climate crisis? Do you think they've been taught about the climate crisis in some kind of more alarmist way than they have in Denmark or Spain or in Monaco or in Albania or in Slovenia or in Germany or in Switzerland or in Slovakia? Do you think there's a massive difference in the level of climate education in the UK than all these other European countries? Do you really think that's the case? Or do you think it might be because of ruinous economic policy, ruinous generational unfairness that young people have been subjected to the entirety of the last 45 years?
Linked. I mean, they could be the most unhappy because of other reasons. It might have nothing to do with climate change. It might be with the fact that we've got rid of organisations like Sure Start and we don't have good as good early learning systems as other countries. I mean, that is something that's been established when it comes to mental health.
That sounds like anti-Semitism to me, Tricia.
Are we using climate change as the reason, or is it? It's just that our children don't have enough coping strategies because we don't have robust enough an early education system. So when things that come up like climate change, like war, I'm sure kids are very scared about war, reading about what's going on in the Ukraine all the time. Is it more about that?
Well, you're right. There are multiple pressures affecting children's mental health at the same time as desperately awful cuts in mental health provision and support for children. And there's also economic pressure.
Why all this anti-Semitism, Caroline? God, it's anti-Semitism everywhere. What, trying to suggest that there should be state investment into public services and into rebuilding the social contract to fix these issues from an economic level? That sounds pretty anti-Semitic to me.
Pressure, and there's also political pressure and the public order bill, which is silencing children from speaking out about things that frighten them more and more and more. We're criminalizing children and young people's distress. But really,
Chris, hang on, Chris. Let's just hear Chris on that.
Dangerously close to denying.
I've taught for 35 years. I have taught 5-year-olds, and what I would say is that, generally speaking, young children can be very positive. But when they go into a lesson about climate change or about a mental health issue, they come out more depressed. We have to answer the question, why is it in the UK?
That is not true. I work with children.
Is there any studies about this? I mean, it could be true, it could not be, but unless you show me a study other than just your gut feeling that you reckon that they come out of the lesson more depressed. Like, I reckon that I know exactly how children feel without a study to show me. Because his only evidence for this is the fact that we have worse mental health in Romania, as if that's evidence that's specifically about climate change.
Young people on these issues.
You see, I can't get a word in there. This is the posing down of freedom of speech. I would like to talk. I can't.
Someone's interrupted me in a debate whilst I'm gish galloping. This is literally taking away my freedom of speech. What headbangers these people really are.
Hang on, Caroline, just let Chris finish.
You taught children about climate
Caroline
change,
will not allow anybody else to have an opinion. That I find quite.
Hang on, I can't hear both of you at once. We can't hear both of you at once. So, Caroline, if you just let Chris finish his point before we come back to you. Chris, go on.
The only point I would like to make, very sanely, is that Caroline needs to allow other people to express an opinion, and children need to understand as well. There are different opinions.
Okay.
Yeah, some of them are backed up by facts, and some of them are fairy tales. And you've already admitted in this very discussion, Chris, that you literally want to teach people fairy tales.
So it's about teaching children different.
No hyperbole, literally zero hyperbole.
Opinions. Finally, Caroline, would you agree with that you teach children? Well, this is what scientists say. However, this is what another body says.
Yes, another body. Yeah, literally Albert Moonhowler, internet headbanger, conspiracy theorist idiots, right? No, we shouldn't teach people that. We should. It's like saying that we should teach intelligent design or creationism in a physics lesson. No, we don't do that. Teach it in religious studies, absolutely. Or by all means, teach about religious education during religious education. If we're going to have a science lesson, we should be taught science that's agreed upon by scientists.
No, this is dangerously close to climate denial. This is dangerously close to saying we are not really in the mess that we're in. This is lying to children.
Like, should we teach Holocaust denial in schools? Because some people believe in that? Because, you know, obviously that is an extreme example, I grant you. Climate denial is not the same thing as Holocaust denial. But should we teach unverified nonsense believed by a minority of internet headbangers over massively agreed upon consensus amongst educate professionals on these issues, right?
This is misinformation, disinformation. Exxon has been doing this for decades. This is profoundly dangerous to children's mental health. This is absolutely the worst thing you could possibly do.
Well, we've got to leave it there, but I'm sure this is just the start of it. I'm sure it's just the start of it. Thank you both.
Well, that was fucking ridiculous. But I'm glad we have finally got the lobbyist for children's fairy tales on the line finally, because clearly that's been missing. Also, by the way, please like, comment, and subscribe, and become a member. Cheers.